All right, hello and welcome to the Age of AI podcast. On this show, we talk to the foremost entrepreneurs and innovators all over the planet who are already bringing cutting edge machine learning to transform different industries. And in today's episode, I am speaking with Mari Ahlquist, and Mari is the CEO of an AI company called iMatrics. They use machine learning to help online news media companies and publishers improve their readers' browsing experience and at the same time greatly save journalists' time, right? So we're going to learn a little about so we're going to learn a little bit about how the news publishing business works and the challenges of going online, how machine learning fits into that story, and what it takes to actually build a good solution, right? I'm your host, Aman, founder and CEO of San Fran Transnational, which is an education company helping non technical entrepreneurs and executives become more technically fluent. So, Marie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you. And so, did I accurately describe what you do, or do you want to correct me or elaborate a little bit?
I think it was really spot on from a high level perspective. The struggle with news media and publishers going online and driving a digital business, and and requiring tools to do that. Coming from this kind of old print thing, going digital means a huge transition, and what we do fits into that narrative.
Yeah, it's not really as simple as, oh, just put up a website and a blog and let people search for articles, and that there you go, you're online, you're in the 21st century. There's more to it than that.
Yeah, sadly for many who struggle with this, there's so many layers to keep in mind with first of all, of course, you need a website, but you also need the tools, digital tools in which your journalist works. For instance, your content management system and all the things that connects these archives of articles and the content that you have and allows your readers to find and consume them. So it's
Mhm. Yeah. So before we get into explaining what you do and how you do it technically, let's set the stage with the big picture. How about we start with a case study? So give me an example of your customers or group of customers and tell me what is their situation, right? What's the story? What are they going through?
Sure. Um, so if we focus on one part of our customers, we could focus on fairly large news organizations.
Okay.
So they have this whole legacy of print that I mentioned before, and now they need to drive a digital revenue. So they
Hmm.
need digital systems to work within, but first and foremost, I mean, they need to be a modern news organization. You need to provide that value to your readers that you have a modern site, you have the latest in navigation, you have good recommendations, and you have all that functionality that readers have come to expect from using other digital tools like social media or maybe Netflix or YouTube, and you get a lot of things as a user and a consumer of content there, and you kind of expect that level as a reader or a user of certain sites, and you need to kind of keep up with that. And we need to keep in mind that news organizations, I mean, they aren't sprung from technology,
Hmm.
and now they need to make these huge technical leaps to be modern and actually compete on a digital arena.
Hmm.
Um,
So,
that's kind of what they're struggling with, this digital transition, and to do that.
mhm. So when we talk about competing, as a news organization, since you're on the ground zero, you're actually talking to all these news companies. Tell me more about the competition side. I mean, from me as somebody who just consumes media, right? What I see is that, of course, like there are differences in newspapers and news organizations. They have different ways that they talk, right? But I feel like they're all pretty much like blogs today. From my perspective, they're all kind of blogs who are just producing more and more articles than ever. And of course, they're primarily advertising driven, right? So they are looking for click through rates and whatnot. But In your market, the people that you work with, how tough is that competition, like digitally versus before when they were print? What's really driving, what's really happening in that market?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of what you just mentioned. I think what for news organizations, the biggest revenue streams are for many readers. You buy
Mm,
the paper, but you buy online subscription, and that is the core as a news organization. You want to be a serious supplier of news, so you want the readers to pay for that service.
mhm,
Uh, and ads are the other spectrum. But both, or ads in particular, have kind of been dropping, especially on the digital arena,
mm,
because of Google. I
mhm,
mean, a lot of ads now go through Google, through Facebook, and that is just undermining the ad business of many organizations and news organizations included. So when we say competing, I would say that the main competition is not between news organizations. Of course,
mhm.
compete for certain
Yeah.
areas, but because they're geographically bound, unless you're in the same geographical area, you really do not compete with one another, sort of.
Mhm,
So what they compete is they compete with Google for ads, for ad
mhm,
revenue. They compete with any app that you have in your phone. Like, where do you, as a reader, spend your digital time? Do you go to
mhm,
a blog? Do you go to Netflix? Do you go to Instagram or Facebook? Or are you actually consuming news?
mhm,
How are you as a reader moving around? So they really feel like they're competing with these big tech giants to
mhm,
gather their revenue, and that's the I would say the big competition in this.
mhm. Yeah, of course. It's like the Coca-Cola problem, right? When they, Coca-Cola's biggest competitor is drinking water, right? Not Pepsi, as the classic story goes, right? And so print subscriptions are dropping, of course. I don't get newspapers. My dad still gets a newspaper. I don't. And I think that's probably true for a lot of families across the globe, right? So
Absolutely.
they're getting, and they're moving now online, right? So you have many publications which have a paywall, like you can read 3 or 4 articles, and then you have to publish, then you have to subscribe to get the rest of their news, right?
Yeah,
uh,
paywalls is super common, and it's
mhm,
applied in many different ways. So some have just paywalls straight up. Some allow you to maybe 10 a week and for free, and then a paywall. There's this whole setting of how do you even make a good business model digital for them. And as you said, I mean, the reader base for the printed magazines is just becoming older and older. So you need to reach the younger generations with the digital. That's the main part.
mhm,
And I mean, another aspect of this is that they feel. I think many people don't actually think too much about this, but when it comes to democracy, news and having that kind of critical view on decision makers is a super important part for the health of a democracy. So they
yeah.
really feel like they're carrying a lot of weight on their shoulders to really provide good news. and
Mhm,
and how should you balance that with that you actually need to make money as well to be able to pay your journalists to be able to do these kind of research that you need to actually fulfill that democracy
mhm.
part of the business.
Yeah, because now they're like kind of competing with all the blogs on Facebook, right? And like basically anybody sitting in their bedroom can start a news organization in a way, like online, right? You
Well,
can go
you,
up and
you can
start writing
start
news articles.
yeah, you can start publishing content. And how do you distinguish yourself from saying that we are a serious news organization? And I mean, there are you can't just call yourself news based
Yeah,
on anything, but there's so much. I mean, every person today is publishing something on Facebook.
yeah.
So in that sense, everybody is producing content.
Hmm.
And how do you keep yourself from how do you distinguish yourself from that? Because that's kind of the online discussion and dialogue and things. And news should be the core thing where people turn to when you need some some serious facts that you can actually rely on.
Hmm. So you said that's one type of customer that you serve. What are some other types who have similar or different problems?
Well, some other types. I mean, you could talk to press agencies, because press
Mm,
agencies' customers are normal news organizations. They don't
mhm,
publish themselves. But then, of course, you have the whole magazine industry. They're also these types of publishers that you're looking for. But if we want to widen the scope, you could say that anyone who has any big organization who has a lot of documents, like
mhm,
knowledge internally, old technical documents or marketing documents, how do you structure that? How do you, in your internal work, how do you kind of communicate internally? Do you have your own news feeds within a company? And
mhm,
how do you work with your archives so people don't just continuously reproduce the same type of documents? That's kind of a
mhm,
widening of that kind of scope of structuring large amounts of content or articles or documents or
mhm. So let's step back a little from that, right? So we're talking about structuring documents. How is that applicable to news organizations? What are their problems with structuring, or why is that an important business problem for them?
well, if you don't have any kind of structure on your, in this case, articles, you can't even have them published online. Like if you go to any
Hmm.
news site, you will have a menu system. Even there, you have the most basic form of structuring. Is it finance or sports? Uh, so that type of reader navigation needs the structured data. You need to place it somewhere. If you
Hmm.
want to go even further, you can have these kinds of offers to readers where you can subscribe to a topic, or maybe your favorite football team, or maybe you're a business person and you want to follow certain companies. You may be interested in investments. And then you can get notifications, you can create your own news feed, so you can kind of follow specifically those areas that interest you as a reader. And if you don't have any idea of the structure of your articles, and what I mean by that is, what is this article about? What's the category? What are some more detailed, like subjects or topics, we call them? And also, what entities do you talk about? So, people, politicians, football players, organizations can be football teams, political parties, companies, geographic locations. Are you speaking about Sweden or Stockholm, or are you talking about Berlin, or are you talking about America? Like, what is this article about?
Hmm.
And this allows the readers to find and consume the content that they want.
Hmm.
That's,
So essentially, it sounds like we're really trying to solve the discoverability problem. We're trying to get more eyeballs on the articles.
yes, I mean that's what they produce and what they sell. So
Hmm.
if you can't get your product to your market,
Hmm.
you're not going to have a revenue. From a reader perspective, it's as simple as that. Then you can kind of drill it down to, you have recommendations on YouTube on what you could watch next. Same, you have
Yeah.
article recommendations or related articles that you can provide your readers with. Anything that helps you find the content that you're looking for.
Makes sense. So since their core revenue depends on keeping people hooked on the platform because they want you to subscribe, right? The biggest,
Yeah,
the easiest, the best way for them to make money, the best way for them to make ethical money as well, is if the readers pay for the news that they get, right?
same
Not from
way as
ads.
you would,
Yeah,
same way like you would the normal printed paper. You as
yeah,
a reader would buy the paper, and
yeah,
this is just that direct transition of that to digital setting.
yeah. So that's the most comfortable carryover to digital news. But to stand out digitally among all the other news organizations and all the other apps and whatnot that are eating up your attention, it's the same classic problem that all the social media platforms have been trying to solve for so long, right? How do you keep people engaged and keep people's eyeballs on like on the feed? Just keep reading, don't go anywhere else, stay with us, keep consuming more and more news, and hopefully if you spend enough time you'll be willing to pay us, not anybody else, to get your news, right? And read more news in the first place.
Exactly. So there's this balance of reading more, but also providing some actually now focus on these more features kind of thing, where you do a deep dive into maybe the financial market to try to explain to the wider audience how to move forward in your private financing or how you save money. And then you would do a feature piece on that to be more detailed to kind of educate as well. So you have that type of thing, but the reviews of politicians, for instance, kind of,
Hmm.
is the government doing what it should? Is there any mishaps anywhere? Is there someone who's not behaving well? I mean, these types of investigations take time. So
Hmm.
compared to social media and other things where you can just output content, here you they need to find the time and make the time to build this really high quality content
Yeah.
for the readers too, because you expect other things from news than from your Facebook feed.
Yeah. Naturally. At least I
Yeah,
do.
I hope most do, and I think they
Yeah.
do actually.
Yeah. And so, since personalization and keeping people engaged is the main problem, it goes to say that you need to categorize the news articles or the content really well and tag those things really well, so that you can actually do that, actually recommend them to the right people, right?
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
about understanding what an article is about, having good categories and tags and metadata in a way of the article,
Yeah,
so that you can see who would be interested in it.
exactly. So when you have this good metadata of your articles, you can provide these extra features for your readers, but you can
Hmm.
also answer kind of the questions that you're looking for. If you look for what your readers are reading, why they are buying, and what is keeping them engaged, you can look at what content are we producing and what content is driving our business. And now you come into more the kind of business intelligence or analytics or decision making side of things, because you can learn so much from this data, just saying, do we even have the right content mix? If we
Hmm.
don't even look at the readers, what content mix are we providing, and is this the right one? And if you combine that then with other data, you could really answer some super important questions.
Hmm.
um,
So for a lot of the people who are listening to this might be non-technical and unfamiliar with the news business, right? How is tagging and categorizing very different from just doing a text search? Like, okay, you have this article, it has all these proper nouns and just things in general that the article talks about, and a simple algorithm could simply scan the article, pick up all the words, and there you go. You have a list of categories, so to speak, and you have a really nice search bar. Since it's on a given simple website, you can just put in, I'm looking for, I don't know, Harry Potter and Donald Trump or something like that, and then it finds all the articles that had those keywords, sort them up by time and date or something else, and there you have it, right?
sure. I mean, in some instances, if your search is as specific as Harry Potter, yeah, it's gonna give you every time it's been mentioned. That's how a search function could do. But when it would be, if we view it like this, language has quite a lot of words.
Hmm.
So when it comes to a specific person or company, you have one specific word that you might use. But when it comes to subjects like what is happening in the stock market, or what is value transitions now, or I'm interested in certain fields or certain organizations, you're actually kind of lacking one term for all of that. So I might have one search term and find certain articles, and you might use a synonym to that, and you
Hmm.
would find different articles. Whereas
Hmm.
if we can combine these and put one label on them, we would both find all the ones that we are looking for. Because I mean, if you just look at a site, if you have a financial section,
Hmm.
not every article in that's going to name the word finance.
Hmm.
So you have really these all these synonyms that you could use, and the way that we need to work with this is that you can't look for the words that are in the article. You have to kind of summarize the meaning of it, and that is the label that you assign. So there shouldn't be a requirement that a specific word needs to be used for this structure. The system in the background needs to be, let's say, smart enough to
Mm-hmm.
place it regardless of if you've used the right words in the text or not. Because if we would force people to do that, we would limit the freedom that journalists have and other content creators on how to express themselves. And that's not something that we can or we are allowed to do, because you need to give the creative people the space to express what they want to say.
So let's talk more about that. Can you elaborate on how this affects the creative freedom or the time that journalists spent on writing?
Yeah, I mean, the system works as you as a journalist. If we take that example, if you're writing your article in real time, the text as you're writing, it's sent to us and we analyze it
No, no, no.
and we give you
Before,
back
uh,
that part.
so before we get into look how your product works, right? We talked about the tagging and the text-based searching, right?
Yep.
Um, but you mentioned that kind of has an effect on the wrong incentives for writers or creators. How does that work again?
Oh yeah, sure. So for a automatic system to in any way kind of influence how you as a journalist chooses to write, means that we as a company, iMatrix, are going to influence the journalism that someone produces, which
Mm,
is a super big no-no when it comes to news, because the journalists are trained in their profession, and having an AI company, shift how they write is going to look really bad, and it could potentially be quite bad. And
mhm,
the same with other content creators. If you're a content creator and I kind of force you to write a certain way, otherwise our system doesn't work.
how
I
do you
mean,
how do you force them to write a certain way?
by if you would say something like, unless you mention this word,
Hmm.
we can't assign it to the right category. So
Oh,
unless
okay.
you mention finance in every financial article, the system won't know what it's about.
Hmm.
That way, I've given you directions on how to write. And if I do
I see.
that for everything you write, for every word you write, I'm going to limit your vocabulary and your ability to express yourself.
I see. So the way you, I mean, I think now I can see it's a natural evolution. The way you recommend articles to the customer, the recommendation system works based on a certain algorithm that categorizes or tags an article in a certain way, and then the journalist is getting from the feedback like, okay, if I write things which have these keywords or all of these keywords, then I'm likely to be ranking at the top of more categories. So it's like a recipe, so I can add more stuff to my article to make it more easy to be picked up by the algorithm. So you're basically serving the algorithm and not the end reader or your profession.
Yeah, you would get that kind of exactly that kind of situation where you would serve only the article or the algorithm and the purposes of the algorithm rather than the journalists or even the readers. So you're helping the computer system that was supposed to help the users.
Hmm.
You're actually turning it around to say that the user needs to help the algorithm. And
Hmm.
if you do systems like that, I think you're on the wrong track. I mean, the purpose of, I think, any digital system, any system at all, is to help the users. If you don't provide help to the users, what are you doing?
And so, of course, like, if you can intelligently tag these articles, that intelligence has to come from somewhere, and you can use machine learning for that. What does that mean in reality? Like, how do you build a machine learning system, like not the model but the overall system, which can actually do this?
Yeah, that's a quite a tricky question, actually.
Hmm.
So when it comes to these algorithms, there are many different ways to approach it. But the way it could be done with machine learning I think many people have heard about this, that you label data and then you train models.
Mm-hmm.
For our perspective, that would mean that you have thousands and thousands of articles that's a human has already said what's the correct answer on, and then you would try to get the algorithm to mimic that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this requires so much work from
Mm-hmm.
the people who need to do this manually, that there is a different approach that could be called unsupervised, meaning that you actually don't need to create this labeling of articles. But what we actually do from our end is that we gather years worth of articles, like what have you written about, how do you write about it, and we construct the algorithm based on that, on your content, which means that you've already produced all the things that we need to use. Plus, we also get the quality of the journalism rather than the quality of someone saying, this is the right tag, this is the right category, these are the people to be mentioned. So, in a system like that, you use different types of models, machine learning, to find the structures in the article. So, what are the structures in the language? What words are used interchangeably? What kind of concepts tend to show up together?
Mm-hmm.
What type of people are mentioned where? So, you have all of these, we call them relations, you could say, between.
Relations.
Uh, yes. So you find these relations in the data, meaning the articles and the words and the sentences and the paragraphs and everything like that. And based on those relations, the system has a good basic setup to understand how to place new articles. Where do these relate to, and what I already know, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the foundation, and this foundation, because we use articles, means that we can work in any language where we can find articles.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that any language where we find a news organization who writes in that language, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the basics, and then we have to build things on top to make it better, to improve over time, and to take new, what we call natural language processing technology, and how to find these entities, like named entity recognition is a word I think some have
Mm-hmm.
heard,
Yeah.
maybe. So there's so much detail in how you construct things on top of this, that we can talk more about that. But there is pretty complicated recipe of algorithms that we apply.
Mm-hmm. So let me try to look at it from from the fundamentals, right? So you essentially, what you do is you're training a model to look at, and it's an unsupervised machine learning system in a way at the core of it, which looks at millions and millions of articles and learns to see how they are similar or different from each other, right? if i read if I have a certain language model already learned, right, and then I go and read like millions of articles, I can tell which articles are similar and they talk about certain similar things, which articles talk about certain different things, right? uh, but for that, how well do I have to understand each article individually?
You mean you as a person, or how well the
The
system needs to
model,
understand?
like it's interchangeably, right?
Well, actually not at all. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about the kind of the scope. So say that you have, I mean, the algorithm doesn't look at the text and say, I think this is a football article. It would group articles together that might be similar, because it finds similarities in data. And some of
Mm-hmm.
these could be that all of these are football articles, but some could be different similarities. And a thing I just want to correct you a little bit on, you could have millions of articles, but
Mm-hmm.
you actually don't need that many, like not
Oh,
millions.
okay.
You need more than 10, absolutely, but it's it's not valuable to think of it in terms of you need millions. Maybe you should have a
Mm.
hundred or 200 or 300,000, but you could have 2, 3, 4 million as well. So you could scale it down to the amount of articles that you need.
I see. So in the end, it sounds like, since you don't have a language model that's actually understanding each individual article at any in any depth, and you're basically looking for similarities, so basically I'm trying to get into the relation side, right? Like what the relations are. So it sounds like from I'm trying to be a non-technical person here, right? It sounds like you have articles, let's say football, let's take football as an example. You have an article that talks about a certain football player that retired recently, okay, from soccer, let's say. So you have that name, you say he was a goalkeeper, he had all these other players in this team, and the coach who said this about him, and da and that whatnot. He scored this many goals and whatnot, right? So you have this one article. You have another article that talks about the newest football stadium being built in Sweden. Let's take, for example, whatever, right? And then you talk about, oh, a new football stadium because the community is really interested in football and the economy, and it talks about some politicians about talking about football and whatnot. So it takes that angle, right? The relation between these two articles, right, is that okay, they have one talks about a football stadium. So football is a common, theme. The first article about the player might not even mention football. It just assumes people know that he's a football player because it's a
He's
famous
famous,
article. Yeah, he's
you know.
famous, right? And you
Exactly.
say he's a goalkeeper, but he could be a hockey goalkeeper, but the model doesn't know, right? But after seeing a lot of these articles, maybe there's another article where that same player is mentioned and football is also mentioned, and there's a few more articles. So you build that relation still based on keywords, on how frequently they appear together, and you create a distance
No,
matrix of sorts.
no, not really.
Mm.
It's
Okay.
it's it's not really built on keywords. So
Mm.
what we would do in this setting, you are correct that the link between them would be football, and the way you could imagine it is a bit like a human being. And I don't want to say that our algorithm is human. Really,
Oh
I
yeah,
don't. But
it's not.
it,
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
you read when you read as a human being, when you read a text, the information that you're getting are all the sentences and all the words and whatever is written in that, and also
Hmm.
the knowledge that you have before, maybe of this famous football player. And if you
Hmm.
kind of summarize all that information, you could easily say this is about football, and it's about this person. You could say that. So in kind of the same, what we do with the unsupervised is we create this process where you could actually kind of, it doesn't work this technically, but you could imagine it as summarizing. If you add all the words together, what is the
Hmm.
overall subject that you're getting? You
Hmm.
could view it in that way. Now, with famous football players, if you find a name of someone as a person, if you didn't know who that was, so you can't say in this article that you made an example of, it doesn't say football, I don't know the team, and I don't know the player. Now,
Yeah.
what would you do? You would take that name and you would say, who is this? And maybe you would go to Wikipedia, you would put it
Yeah.
in, and
Yeah.
that would say, this is a famous football player.
Yeah.
So we have that databases as well. So we can take that name and we can go to our database and say, do we know who this is? And the database would say, yeah, it's
Ah.
probably
Okay.
this football player. Yeah. And then you get another way of connecting to football as well.
So the system requires or can take advantage of some pre-existing hierarchies or some pre-existing like data structures that already contain some contextual information. Like, okay, if the machine learning system, if the machine learning model comes across an article about the football player, but the article doesn't mention football, so he might as well be a hockey player. Like the model doesn't know. And then some other, so while learning, while processing this article, it would refer to some more authoritative, like Wikipedia. You mentioned Wikipedia, right? But is that actually like there's a third party data collection which you refer against to build those relations, or is this like all through just news articles, or you don't have to train the model on anything else, or you don't have any other information source available except for just thousands and hundreds of thousands of articles?
Yeah, and here we kind of come to the complicated bit. The answer kind of is all of
Yeah.
them. So in the core, the
I see.
unsupervised, because the football player would have been mentioned in other football articles, you would get that relation that we talked about before. But
Yeah.
because we want
Yeah.
to improve the system, we have
Mm.
added other things where we can have our own databases that are compiled of open data, such as Wikidata and Wikipedia, where we can look things up, and then we can have entities with more information. So we would know that a famous politician is a politician. We would
Yeah.
know the correct party that that person is linked to, and that could be, you can view it as it enforces our relations. So we have stronger
Mm,
relations, and we could also, by doing that, more accurately separate people with the same name in different settings. So if you have a
mm,
famous person who is a football player who shares a name with a famous politician, we could kind of guess who you're actually referring to based on the subject of the article. So here is, we have this core system, but we apply a lot of tools on top of that. And this entity disambiguation and entity recognition is aspects that we have added to that. So that kind of makes it complicated. How do you improve something that was just made
mm,
from the articles?
mm. And that makes sense, right? Basically, it shows that it's not really a straightforward problem. There's so many ways to improve upon it, and there's so much, like, it's a system, right? It's not just one recipe that kind of you let go and it works for all the different kinds of news organization and news topics. It's kind of like you have to have a more different approaches to make it work together as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. And one key example of that is, if you look at, an example could be Madonna.
Hmm.
If I say Madonna, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Is it the painting? Is it the Holy Mother? Is it the artist? Is it her
Yeah.
first record? There's so many things that actually is called Madonna if you would search
Hmm.
for it. The same with, if we look at where our customers are placed, you have a lot of physical places who share a
Hmm.
name. So there's a Swiss place called Baden, but there's at least 15 to 20 Baden in the world. But given that we know where the customer is, we could guess that if they are in Switzerland, maybe they mean the Swiss one, but if they are in French, maybe in France, maybe they mean the French one. Uh, so you have to put context into that aspect as well.
Hmm.
And it makes it kind of tricky because that is kind of the aspect of entities, so things with names. You have other aspects that in different physical locations, you talk about a little bit of different things. So if you go up north in Sweden, you would have the mining industry that is much more predominant, maybe in the news. If you go to the southern part of Sweden, we've had a really strong relation in with one of our customers between diving and education, because in this city is one of Sweden's most famous diving educations that you can have.
Hmm.
But no one else is going to have that relation because no one else has a famous diving course in that sense. So
Hmm.
when you drill down to these kind of details, you are discovering more and more, challenges.
So do you have to build new domain knowledge into your system or find a source of domain knowledge for your system every time you onboard a new customer?
No, there's a good base in first of all in the articles. We have everything that they've written about over the past years.
Mm.
So say that we
Okay.
usually have a political cycle, so 4 years for most countries. We
Hmm.
have the politicians and such. So in general, the core answer is no.
Hmm.
We have so much knowledge. But if you have certain specified areas, maybe super local sports.
Mm.
I don't know super local sports team in Spain or even
Hmm.
in Sweden.
Yeah.
So if you have it, if someone has a database that could connect to that, we could extend that knowledge that we have and improve. So we do that all the time. We extend with our own knowledge. Our customers put in knowledge and sometimes share with other customers, and some of them have their own databases of knowledge that we connect to
Hmm.
as well.
Hmm. Hmm. So let's talk about one more aspect of this. The world is changing, right? A lot. And so you have new topics come up, right? 10 years ago, nobody was writing about blockchain and crypto, and nobody was writing news articles about these things, right? And right now, if we start writing, oh, this new thing is coming up, 3D printing or 3D printing is pretty old, but I don't even know like what's going to come up next, right?
Well, a good
Something to do with
example is
genetic
coronavirus when
babies.
it
Yeah,
showed up.
coronavirus, right?
Yeah,
And
one.
yeah, in the future maybe gene editing babies and clinics and whatnot, right? Uh, does the tagging, or have you thought about this, like how does the tagging based on prior history and the relations you build, right, how does that work with things like the coronavirus where you suddenly have an upsurge and you have no way to tag them?
It's a very good question. And when it is something like the first mention of coronavirus, the system is blind because there is no information to relate that to. It's never been mentioned. It's not a concept that exists kind of on even on Wikipedia or Wikidata. So there's no real reference points.
Yeah.
So you could absolutely identify that it's maybe a new word, for instance.
Hmm.
So then you have to build things with our customers. A system like this cannot be static. So we have one taxonomy, which are all the tags that we can return.
Yeah.
So all the subjects. So the fastest way is for someone to just add this. Then we
Yeah.
know about it in a sense. So either someone does that manually because even from the first article about corona that this is going to be a thing, so you just add that tag. So you
Hmm.
have metadata administrators who would do that, or we could do that
Hmm.
as well. When more knowledge is evolved on open places and even in the articles themselves, there are scale advantages where we can pick that up. So
Hmm.
it's not just one thing, but if you want this super quick, it's the first article it's ever been mentioned, this is completely new, the system has no previous relations to it. But you would pretty quickly be able to say, because I would assume the first article about the coronavirus was either about pandemics or epidemics, but at least about viruses, kind of
Hmm.
explaining what this new virus is. So
Yeah.
you would instantly connect that with diseases because the article in itself is about diseases and viruses. So you would still have that kind of setting to it, even though we might not have the new word just yet.
Hmm. Yeah, and it could even work like, for example, if you have an article, let's say at the beginning of the pandemic, like, oh, a lot of people are getting the flu in this little town in Wuhan in China, although Wuhan's a big city, but and then you have like, oh, it's spreading now, and then more people are getting the flu, and then the government is getting involved, and like, oh, it may not be the flu, it may be a different kind of thing. Um, so you might still categorize those things, those early signs of news,
Yeah.
but you could also compare them with what's happened in the past, right? Whoa, this actually feels like the same way people talked about the influenza pandemic 100 years ago. So the articles seem to kind of match, right, like how people were talking. So maybe it's a pandemic. You add that category on something that people are not calling a pandemic yet. I don't know. That's just something that popped up in my head just now.
If you had enough data, meaning enough articles, you could
Yeah.
absolutely trace patterns, but
Yeah.
patterns come with lots of articles. So with the
Mhm.
first article, you would still not have a pattern, if you know what I mean. Even if we would first
Yeah.
of all need the articles from that Spanish flu 100 years ago. But even the
Mhm.
first article, I mean, because generally you speak about a flu and a virus and people getting sick and maybe it's spreading, that doesn't mean that it's a new global pandemic because this
Yeah.
happens with
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
Ebola. You have a lot of other viruses where this happens. So you would start to need the articles. And like us humans, I mean, we had no idea that we were entering a pandemic when this started, and our system would not have known that as well. It's
Mhm.
not going to be smarter than humans in that in that
Mhm.
sense. And I think there's some researchers who have better predictive models on where the next pandemic could come from and such, but they look at different things than news articles, I think.
Yeah. So the models that you're training, are they learning with time? Are they getting improved? Or typically with unsupervised, like, you did say that you can transfer the learnings from all the data that the model, that the system has already ingested, right? Uh, is that a thing, or do you prefer to start from scratch, or for different types of organizations, because different types of publication might want different types of tags for
Yes.
their content, right? if I'm not a news, if I'm a lifestyle blog or publication, I don't want my articles to be tagged under very political categories and whatnot, right?
Exactly. Well, if we're looking at the system, I mean, today building a system that doesn't evolve is, yeah, I think it's a stupid decision. And our customers, because they're going through this digital transition, the system needs to evolve with them.
Yeah.
It needs to get, so every time they write an article, it's sent to us and it's stored with us, so we have the
Hmm.
latest articles as well. Of course, it's not just this whole first setup is just for us to have this baseline of maybe 4 years of articles to start
Hmm.
from, and then we grow with your whole production from there. uh, that's one aspect. There are other feedbacks as well, because when we suggest tags, if someone removes them, say that
Hmm.
the system, I mean, it's not 100% accurate. No AI
Yeah.
system or machine learning system is going to be 100% on point with what you as a viewer think is correct. So if you add or remove something, that feedback is sent to us. And that is feedback that we can use in different ways, to evolve the system and help the system evolve and detect mistakes or bugs or other things that we need to fix. So we say that we could have a four-way feedback loop in a
Mm.
sense that way. So it's not just one way that the system improves, but it's actually different ways that the system improves. But it's really evolving, and it's not static at all. And I think to just think about that, kind of for it to be static, I mean, if our customers are going through this digitalization, maybe the first use case is to have this for readers to create your own news feed. So what type of metadata do you need for readers to do that?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
once you've implemented that, what's the next step? Maybe it's this business analytics. Now we need to learn about these things. Okay, then you have to go and say, is it good enough for us to do that? Is it the right things? Do we need more metadata? Do we need different metadata? And then you add and evolve based on use cases as well. So, like you said, everybody has a different need. You can might have a different niche, but depending on your use case, you might have certain requirements that
Mhm.
that you want fulfilled, and those requirements change over time.
Mhm. Wow. How many people do you have in the company doing all of this?
We are 11 people today,
Mm, wow.
and then we of course have our board and our owners and such, but we work also super closely with our customers.
Interesting. Like, because it sounds like from the picture that we just saw about the technical challenges of building the system, and also all the other human work that you have to do to keep improving the system and personalize it for different news organizations and whatnot, right? And different contexts, right? It feels like, whoa, this would probably need like a huge team of engineers to just keep chipping away at the same system and fitting in like some fixes and plugs and whatnot. So maybe I'm missing something from, or maybe I'm getting the wrong idea about how complex the system actually is and needs to be on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think from our start, because we're not that old, we were founded in 2015. We don't have these legacy issues that bigger organizations do. We could build a good technical system from the start that allows us to work in a smart way.
Hmm.
But like our customers who needs automation to be more efficient, we invest our time not in manually making every system customized. We invest our time in being able to automatically customize the system for you.
I see what you
So the
mean.
setup process, as soon as you give us our articles, the system can set itself up automatically.
Hmm.
Then we have to have a dialogue about your needs and how do we customize, how do we calibrate it, and but we are coming to a point where their initial setup could be you toggling a few buttons and having a dialogue with us. That initial setup with the articles is almost fully optimized for us. Um, but then, if you, as a customer, have certain unique requirements or certain things, we would focus on just those aspects, not the core system. So we automate, and we make things more efficient.
Hmm. So So you have these automatic systems that ingest the data, and I won't get into how they automatically find the right sources of information that you need to improve the model such that it can provide the best tags. I can see why it could be possible. So I'm trying to get a little more operational here. From the beginning of your company, how long did it take you to actually get the system up?
Yeah, sure. So um, what we have from we're pretty university connected, so we have a lot of we one of our co-founders is a research within large scale data analytics, so AI and machine learning and how to use those kind of large scale problems. So we have that core of knowledge, and we can do really really good text analytics.
Mm,
So that's where we started.
okay.
Where do we apply super super high quality text analytics, because that's
Hmm.
what we're really good at.
Hmm.
And in 2015 we kind of started with that question, but you have text everywhere. And one of the first ideas we had was to combat hate speech online, because
Mm,
if you're good at doing text analytics, you could apply it to find and correct or even moderate hate speech automatically. So we were going through so many use cases and so many different types of customers, and eventually we found the news industry and talked to them about several of these ideas that we had. And they basically asked us, okay, if you're this good at doing text analytics, why can't you just fix our tags? Why can't you just do that automatically?
mm,
And that was in the late 2016 that they
mm,
said that to us. And during 2017, we got then the opportunity to prove that we could do this, because
mm,
the first customer that we had allowed us to do a pilot study with them to
mhm,
showcase that we could construct these algorithms. So we did. They were super surprised and happy with the result. And then they challenged us again. Okay, now you have a month and a half. We need this system to be online, not just an algorithm, but it needs to be working in our system. Uh, and we said, sure,
okay.
just got our heads together and set up that service. So there's a difference between
Mhm.
having an algorithm that can do something on a computer and having a service that you can
Yeah.
actually speak to like every second all the time. So we
Mhm,
launched our first system in September of 2017.
mhm,
And I would say that in general, when people were doing this manually before, it didn't take but a few months before we were on average better than the average journalists, to start with. And at that point, we
mm,
started with not with entities, but with categories and topics, like we call
mhm.
them, or
Yep.
subjects. And so that was the first small part of the system. With just saying, is it finance, or is it sports, is it football, all of these things. And then we could say that, okay, but if it's a sports article, a reader is interested also in the sports teams and the people, not just the label football.
Yeah.
So the next step from that was to grow this entity part. And
Mm,
and from the beginning, these setup projects where we like constructed the service individually for each customers were quite heavy. And to scale something like that, we needed to look at ourselves and say, okay, if we're helping customers automate
mhm,
their processes and be efficient, we need to be efficient, and we can automate this. So did we still focus on that today, because we're not. I don't think we might ever be fully completed. I think there's also always something more that you could you could automate or make more efficient. Um,
mhm,
but as then from 2018 and onwards, we've continued to learn, to prove that we can do what we do in multiple languages, to prove that we can make our processes more efficient, that we
mhm,
can lower the setup time, and allow for a super complicated system to be quite easy to buy and integrate and work with as a customer. Because if we would always sell our services as complicated as they actually are technically, the buying processes would probably be 15 years, because you would actually have to understand all of it. So we're selling that high quality output and the fact that you can use it. And then from having launched what we call the full system, we need to add better quality, better detection, better disambiguation, and also connect to these other sources. So if you speak about a place, you get the geographical data.
Mm-hmm.
If you speak about a football player, you can see that this is a football player and what team they're connected to. So you add all of this knowledge to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you build a management system so you allow the customers to have control of how the system develops if they like. So that aspect is one of the later additions that we now offer a lot of control to our customers who have their own ideas and demand certain things from us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the evolution. And then our team has grown. We actually onboarded 5 new people full time during 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that was a actually we thought it was going to be more of a challenge than it was, but almost doubling the team during the pandemic is hi, welcome to your home office might not be the coolest introduction that a new
Mm-hmm.
employee can have.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so, it also sounds like, I mean, so the text analysis that you have, the research background of the company, the text analysis is still the DNA of the product. So my question is, how much of the product conceptually is just that much, that unsupervised, training model, and how much of the product is all the other stuff, all the other features and automated plugins you have to build on top of that?
Yeah. Okay. So I yeah. How much of the core that we started with is based on the whole system today?
Yeah.
Well, if we look at the first product that we launched,
Mm-hmm.
that core is still there. It's the relationship part that we talked about, and I must say that that is a huge
Mm.
part. But if you're looking at the actual system today, it's 20%, 30%. It's
Interesting.
really it's really it's super complicated, but we have to make other features and we have to make other, as you said, plugins, make the integrations easy, make the add-ons of new databases easy. We have to be able to deal with if you have
Mm.
a nickname for someone. A football player might have a nickname. So how do you
Oh.
deal with the fact that sometimes you don't even mention what you're actually talking about? Like
Mm.
how do you connect that? And a lot of political parties are always mentioned by abbreviation.
Mm.
Like there's so many different aspects to these that you could, so you have one that we call concept management, and
Mm.
then you have the auto tagging, and the concept management part gives you a lot of control, but it's completely separated from the algorithmic core. So maybe 30% is being a bit harsh to our system, but yeah, that's my view on it. I need to ask my tech team if they would give me. Maybe they will be upset with me for saying that. But I
Mm.
think I also have that perception because we are. It's such a finished part. It's such a well and smooth part of our machinery that it really doesn't take up any time anymore. It's not
Mm.
that part that we, of course, we maintain it and improve it, but it's not the part that really needs to. We're done with the automation. We're done with the core of the quality. So it's there are other aspects that require our attention.
Mm. So in a sense, the core machine learning part of the product was already done like 5 years ago or 4 years ago, and everything else has been about making it into a finished product.
And automizing it and like there's a difference between being able to do something and automating it. So you
Yeah.
have to make improvements to it to automate it. So it's not like we were done with it 5 years ago. We're still making
Mm.
improvements
Yeah.
to it. But as a whole, the system requires and as our customers evolve, they demand new things. So
Mm.
we have, for instance, we've added to the amount of metadata that we can return that
Mm.
that are additions. It of course affect the foundation, but not that not that much. So the foundations that we have was a super solid base, and now we're kind of expanding on that and have been.
Cool. Well, Marie, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom today with me and the listeners.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was super fun to be here, and thank you for being a good host.